Hello, everyone. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to this FPF Discuss debate. My name is Federica Agostini. I'm a research associate at the Florence School of Banking and Finance of the Robert Schuman Center of the European University Institute. And I will be moderating today's session on the EU securitization market and its role in propelling the transition. Especially for our new participants, I wanted to say a few words about the very innovative and interactive format that we will be using today that draws on Oxford-style debates and also on the approaches by debating societies. So today's session will bring together two contestants that will discuss a specific motion, and they will have to provide introductory remarks and a short rebuttal. They will have a limited time, and they will also be stopped if they go beyond. And this interactive format should also allow you to extensively engage with the speakers, because you will be asked to participate in a series of polls and to vote on the motion. And we also encourage all participants to submit any questions in the Q&A box. We will come back to these questions in a dedicated Q&A session. It's also a pleasure for me to say that we have over 80 registered people coming from over 27 nationalities across the world. Our participants are working at financial institutions, government entities, European institutions, and global organizations such as the IMF. So today's motion is: this House believes that the EU securitization market can support the transition to a sustainable European economy. And we have the pleasure to have with us Anne Schaedle and Daniela Gabor. At this stage, we would like to invite you all to vote in our first poll and answer the following question: is the EU securitization market supporting the transition to a sustainable European economy? Yes, the EU is using securitization both to fund green activities and to free up the balance sheet of banks for more green lending. Yes, even though it has not unlocked its full potential yet. No, and will not be able to do it until the full completion of the Capital Markets Union. No, as the EU securitization market is clearly subdued. While you answer to this question, I wanted to say very few introductory remarks. So, since the American subprime mortgage crisis in 2007, stringent regulatory attention has focused on the securitization market. And the EU securitization market experienced a contraction, and it remains at historically low levels. Market actors often cite the existing EU regulatory framework as a significant barrier. However, ongoing and upcoming policy measures also have the potential to increase the appetite for securitizations, such as the banking package or a potential review of the securitization regulation in the next EU Commission's mandate. In principle, securitization could also serve as an accelerator of sustainability goals. And several EU sustainable finance initiatives, such as the recently approved Green Bond Standard, have also partially regulated green securitizations. Yet, the question still remains open as to whether securitization constitutes the adequate instrument to propel the green transition in the EU. And also, could the reform of the current framework provide the right incentives, checks, and balances? This will be the core of today's discussion. So for today's debate, we invited two very distinguished experts on securitization. First, our proponent, Anne Schaedle. She's the head of Unit for Policy Definition and Coordination in the European Commission's Directorate General for Financial Stability, Financial Services and Capital Markets Union, DG FISMA. The unit is in charge of coordinating strategic reflections in the DG FISMA, such as the preparation of the new mandate, but also some specific files, like the further development of the securitization framework. Anne joined the European Commission in 2008 and has been working in DG FISMA since 2015, firstly working on the crisis management framework and bank resolution. Anne started her professional career in the private sector. She also holds a law degree and a PhD in law from University of Augsburg, Germany, and a public policy master degree from London School of Economics. Welcome to FPF Discuss, Anne. It is a great pleasure to have you with us today. Second, we also have our opponent, Daniela Gabor. She's professor of economics and macrofinance at UWE Bristol. She was an expert witness at the 2015 European Parliament hearing on securitization, and she's currently the Roger W. Ferguson Jr. and Annette L. Nazareth member at the Institute of Advanced Study, Princeton, where she's writing a book on macro-financial politics of decarbonization. Welcome, Daniela. We are thrilled to have you on today's debate. Before starting, I wanted also to mention a few housekeeping rules. So just like we did a few minutes ago, you will be asked some questions during the debate. Please participate in these poll questions. All the answers can be answered anonymously. Please use the Q&A box to ask questions during the debate, and we'll come back to these later in a Q&A session. Our contributors will have a limited time and will be interrupted in case time is up. And if you wish, please engage in this conversation on our social, especially on Twitter and LinkedIn, and please feel free to use the hashtag FPFDiscuss. Just before passing the floor to our proponent and opponent, I wanted to flag that the results of the first poll are the following. 50% voted that yes, the EU securitization market can support the transition, even though it has not unlocked its full potential yet. 21% voted no, and that it will not be able to do it until the full completion of the Capital Markets Union. And 29% no, as the EU securitization market is clearly subdued. Okay, so we are ready to start with the opening remarks, and they will be followed by a short rebuttal from both sides. So please keep following and engaging and do not miss the polls. Anne and Daniela, you will now have each 7 minutes sharp. Anne, you will have the floor first.
Okay. Well, very good to hear the outcome of the poll already. I think that's already a good outcome like this, and I hope that the question, the points on point 2 go even higher after this talk. So first, to set the scene a bit, I mean, we have on the Green Deal and the green transition, there are big financing needs to finance the transition. And all of this, I mean, there are really huge financing needs and generational challenges in a way. And the public resources available for this are just not enough to finance this transition. So it needs to come a lot also from capital markets and from private finance. And in this context, the Commission has, of course, developed, or the EU then, with co-legislated, a whole framework for sustainable finance, where we try to set a market structure, let's say, where we have definitions of what is green, we have transparency. So the belief is that we ask companies to disclose their greenness and financial products to disclose greenness, and some tools like bonds, green bonds, or benchmarks, and set the whole framework on that. And in this context, securitization is one of the tools we want to use there. Securitization, I hope that the audience is familiar what it is. So it's a tool of packaging bank loans and selling it on to other market investors, which then allows banks to free the balance sheet in order to do further lending and handing out loans. And it also has a risk sharing element in it, so that risk is not only maintained in the banking system but also spread across other investors. So with the whole per se already, securitization is useful, we believe, in the development of capital markets. And I'm not only talking about green securitization, but securitization in general, because you have, by this idea that banks are able to lend more, they are also able to lend more for the green transition. But beyond this general framework for securitization, we have recently had 2 initiatives which are relevant for that on green securitizations. One is that the Green Bond Standard has a particular chapter for green securitizations or green bonds, or securitizations labeled then as green bonds. The standard for this is quite high. We see, of course, also market practices around green securitizations where either green underlying, so energy efficient mortgages are securitized, for example, and so on. So there is, of course, always a market practice out there, and this Green Bond Standard is in a way a gold standard with quite high conditions, because it tags. So the label is only available if the use of proceeds which come from a securitization are given for loans which meet the taxonomy criteria. And the taxonomy criteria the taxonomy is a tool of defining what is green, what is deep green. So only very high, very green activities, let's say, meet these criteria. So it's per se also difficult in a way to so that's why I call it a gold standard, because it's not so easy to meet. One point we have debated a lot with co-legislators was how to construct green securitizations, namely if the pool of underlying assets should be taxonomy compliant, or rather the proceeds coming from a securitization for future projects. And because we are at the moment rather at the beginning of the transition, we believe, and there are not so many bank loans out there which meet already the taxonomy criteria. We have for transitional period, for the standard foresees that any loans can be securitized. There are some exclusion criteria in it, so fossil fuels and things like that are out. But that the important thing is that it should be used for new projects, green projects. So we think that is an important element, and that someone who wants to, an investor who wants to invest green, has the confidence that future projects are financed with that. And then I said we have a second initiative, which is also already existing law, and namely that STS securitizations have to disclose the greenness of their underlying assets. And for that, we recently adopted a regulatory technical standard where we harmonize and standardize the disclosure for this. In a way, by standardizing, it makes it easier for the investors to know what they are buying. It makes it easier also to package loans if they know how. For securitization, you always want a certain standardization and harmonization so that the underlying pool is clear of what is bought, and this RTS helps with this. Then going forward, you may have seen, I mean, securitization is very high on the agenda politically at the moment with the new impetus for the Capital Markets Union. We are very happy in a way with that, because we see, as you also stated in the introductory remarks, that the market is currently subdued since the global financial crisis, and is way behind. There are different conditions or reasons for this, of course, and I'm not going into that. But we hope that with the new political push, that we can revitalize the market. And one interesting idea, what we may look going forward, or which we are debating, which came up in a recent ECB statement of the Governing Council, also on the CMU, was, for example, if something could be done for green mortgages in the securitization area. So this is really only to be explored in very initial stage, but since we are in the stage of preparing for the new mandate, these are things we are looking into. And just to say, it's I mean, the motion that is securitization there in order to support the market, we think yes, there is a way for that, but there are many other tools, of course, out there, and it's not the, let's say, it's not the key tool within the sustainable finance toolbox, but it's one element. And since the financing needs are so big, I think it's important that all different avenues and all different tools are explored, and securitization is one of them, and it should be used to the benefit like many other tools we have. Yeah, I think that is it. I hope I stayed in the 7 minutes.
Yes, you were very on time. Thank you for your initial remarks, Anne. So now we have another poll for our audience. Let me read it before passing the floor to Daniela. Does the current EU securitization framework set the right incentives for the sustainable securitization market to develop? Could we have the poll up? Thanks. Yes, especially the green bond standard. Yes, especially the simple, transparent, and standardized label under the securitization regulation. No, the framework is too complex and stringent. No, the measures lack coordination. Okay, so while the poll will still be open for a few more seconds, I will leave the floor to Daniela.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Anne, for your introductory remarks. And let me say that I saw the numbers on the first poll with some trepidation, since I live in England. 50-50 or 51-49 reminds me of Brexit. So let's try to move it somewhere in a different direction. And I think Anne set up very nicely the kind of framework or the context in which this particular debate is interesting and relevant, that is beyond the technicalities of securitization. And I want to make 3 points, starting from the idea or the overall narrative that we have about securitization in, I'm not looking at the polls, although I see more no's rather than yes. So the context is that, or the narrative we have is that the securitization market is subdued. It's subdued for a variety of reasons that have to do with the regulatory framework in particular. And because we have these large financing gaps in Europe that cannot be covered by public funds, what we need to do is we need to mobilize private capital, and securitization is always at the forefront. Every time Europe wants to mobilize private capital, somehow securitization pops up, at least in my experience of having followed this since the global financial crisis, when securitization was a dirty word. It's not a dirty word in Europe, at least since 2014, for a variety of reasons. And I want to make 3 points against the proposition. First one is that if we want to scale up securitization markets in a way that would be meaningful for financing the green transition, with that scale comes greenwashing. So I have very significant concerns about greenwashing, and I'll elaborate why. The second point I want to make is that related to something that Anne said, that dirty taxonomy and penalties on the dirty financial flows would be far more effective than encouraging securitization at mobilizing green private investment. So we have better tools, much more effective. We're just not choosing to deploy them for political reasons. And the third point that I want to make is that securitization is seen as a quick win, but it cannot be the magic wand that will free us from what I think is the real constraint in financing the green transition, which is the green fiscal straitjacket that the European Union has constructed for itself for a variety of political reasons that have not very much to do with the green transition. And that explains, and I'll come back, that explains this third point. Why is it that there is again political momentum behind securitization? I think because we are at a moment in Europe when austerity is on everybody's minds, and the idea is, okay, let's find some pools of private capital that we can mobilize so we don't have to bicker about changing fiscal rules again. So I said 3 points. The first one, with scale comes greenwashing. And why am I worried about greenwashing? Well, you know, the European Commission has been worried about greenwashing quite significantly for a very long time in the sustainable finance taxonomy. There are some debates about how much greenwashing there is in the sustainable finance taxonomy already because of the inclusion of particular transition activities. But I want to make 2 points about related to why I think with scale. So this idea that with scale comes greenwashing. The first one, Anne already touched on it, the idea that the use of proceeds is assigned to the originator, not to the SPV, not to the issuer. And I think there was a significant lobbying there from private finance to make sure that, in a sense, you don't have green securitization throughout the chain. What you have is just making sure that you have use of proceeds that go into green projects. I am not particularly convinced by the idea that we don't have enough green loans in Europe to generate significant momentum for green securitization. And why am I concerned about that? Because you can end up basically using a portfolio of securitizing a portfolio of, however you want to call them, dirty or semi-dirty or loans in order to generate green securitization. And I'm not sure that that's a door that we want to open. That's the first worry about greenwashing. The fact that I think private finance has already won a political battle about how to define the use of proceeds and who has responsibility for it. And the second one has to do with recent innovations and with the fact that what the European Commission and the European Council, European politicians in general, continue to aspire to this market-based finance that the US has. And what we know from initiatives in the US is that there is this idea to separate credit risk from emission risks in bank portfolios and to basically outsource emission risks to private credit markets. There are several initiatives that are trying to do that, to basically another form of greenwashing that just displaces, the dirtiness of the loan from the banking system into private credit markets, into private equity funds or in other spaces. And why is that a worry in particular? Because we know that over the next several years, there will be around $3.2 trillion in issuance of bonds and other financial instruments that need to be refinanced from dirty loans that need to and instruments that need to be refinanced. So the fact that there is this need for dirty financial instruments to be refinanced raises to me the question of how that would create additional pressure for greenwashing. So that's the first point that I wanted to make. With scale comes greenwashing. The second point that I wanted to make is that we already in the European Union, until very recently, had a far more muscular approach towards mobilizing private capital, not through creating carrots, which is what the European Commission is trying to do. The securitization regulation is to create momentum and carrots for financial institutions to securitize more. We had sticks. We had conversations about and political commitments that are not there anymore about a dirty taxonomy, and we had penalties. We had penalties in the European Central Bank's framework for decarbonizing monetary policy, in the framework for decarbonizing the unconventional bond portfolio holdings. We had a tilting approach that basically said, if you don't change the carbon intensity of your portfolios, the carbon intensity of your activities, then we will buy less of your bonds and we will buy more of green bonds. And the European Central Bank did that for 9 months. I think it was a very effective tool, and I think that's why they suspended it to some extent. And we need a much closer control of credit flows from the public sector rather than carrots in order to generate, I think, the signaling effects that you would get from the European Central Bank or the European Commission pushing again for a dirty taxonomy and pushing for instruments to penalize the dirty issuance. It would be far more effective than creating the conditions for mobilizing private capital through securitization. That's my second point. We have better tools. The politics is not there to use them. And my third point goes to the question of political momentum. Asking why is it that securitization is back on the agenda? Why is it being pushed by the European Council? And I think, to me, taking a step back and thinking about the political economy of this question rather than the technicalities, I think securitization is more of a political tool in the European Union, or a political issue rather than a technical or a regulatory issue. And what do I mean by this? We are at the moment in geopolitics, in the geopolitics of the green transition, where there is very clear competition between the European Union, the US, although we don't talk about that so much, and China over how do you accelerate both the adoption of clean technologies, but also the manufacturing and the production and export of clean tech. And what we see from the US, and it's very obvious to me, but I'm happy to debate it, is that you're not going to get the scale of in private investment in green technologies that the US is getting through financial instruments. What the US is getting is pouring large, significant amount of fiscal resources through the US Inflation Reduction Act. That is how you mobilize private capital, whether you do it successfully or not. But that's the first step to mobilize private capital, is not to kind of tinker at the edges with particular financial instruments like securitization, but is to get the state to be significantly more involved. So to me, the question of securitization, and I'm going to finish here, to me, the question of the political momentum behind securitization is simply the result of the political obstacles that we have in the way of putting more fiscal resources into the green transition that have to do with, decades of how we organize the macrofinancial architecture in the European Union. Okay, I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. I see that you disagree on many points, so I think it will be a very interesting debate. So we have again a poll for our participants, and if I could, we could have the poll up, the third poll up. So, can the EU securitization market, even under a more permissive regulatory framework, be the key funding market for the green transition? Yes, given the fiscal constraints, it can scale up private investment. No, it will allow banks to shift risks of CO2 emissions into private credit markets. No, the European promotion is a smokescreen for political constraints on public funding of the green transition. And lastly, it is not the right tool to support the transition. looking forward to seeing your answers to this. And while we let the public vote on this question, let me recall to you both that you now have 3 minutes each for a short rebuttal in order to react to some of the points raised by the proponent or the opponent. And to our public, I wanted to remind you that you can feel free to already type your questions in the Q&A box, and as we will then have our Q&A session. So I really look forward to receiving your questions. Thank you. Anne, the floor is yours for the rebuttal.
Yes, maybe the first point was the risk of greenwashing and the idea that we don't have, from our view, that we don't have enough green assets out there, green loans which can be securitized. I mean, I said initially, well, we had a debate in the negotiations, but to be honest, we thought we have more of a debate which didn't come then. I mean, we weren't sure how we are starting the debate, and very quickly, actually, we had EBA advice, which had looked at the figures of how many assets, how many bank loans are indeed taxonomy compliant and could be securitized, and there is simply not enough out there. So it was not down to lobbying, but it was rather based on the quantitative and the facts and figures we got from our expert agency on that. And it was then not a long debate, but rather we start with this model of the use of proceeds, and then we go forward and assess it in, I can't remember now, or 5 or 10 years, how it is. And then the approach will be switched over, and it will be done like that. And we also had, because of this, had transparency requirements in there. So there's first an exclusion for certain, like fossil fuel, I said already, is out. So you do not have brown assets in there. The dark brown is out. And second, there is clear transparency on it, what is in the pool with various requirements, what exactly you need to disclose, what percentage. So you don't even need to go down in the level of detail of the loans, but what's the percentage for certain groups of assets and so on. And then on the basic point of we should pour more public money into the green transition and have and not tinker with the edges with some financial tools. I would say ideally we have carbon pricing and taxes on that. That would be the best thing, and have the market work like that, which is not possible. Which is to a certain level is there. We have some emission trading, but ideally a market works by pricing then the externalities in, and then you have a better system in that. But we are not at this stage, and we don't have it. So we work with what we have, and on that point, simply the fiscal space at the member state level is very different. We have a big debate on some member states having more space and others not, where we see rather the concerns of having distortions in the single market coming from that. So, and already there, I mean, at the EU level, it's not possible politically to have a big spending from EU resources. We have, but that said, it is actually with the New Generation EU, a third of the whole investment coming from New Generation EU. So the COVID fund is on green projects, and let's just all hope that this indeed goes to these green and most promising clean technologies. And the idea of some parts are too difficult to finance privately, and the state has to play a role and has to cleverly, let's say, finance it in order to crowd in private money as well. I think this is also, let's say, embraced here, and ideally public funding is used in a way to take the highest risk activities, but still have market funding in there. So I'm skeptical of having more fiscal spending there and more public spending in this. And I think it's a different, let's say, a different philosophy what we have there, where we hope to say, well, there's public finance is constrained, and we simply need to work more with private finance, and that is what the sustainable finance framework tries to do. And now I forgot the third point. I'm sorry. What was your third one? Can you just remind me, Daniela?
Yes. So it went exactly where you just talked, which is that how do we mobilize private finance, and the securitization way of mobilizing private finance is to change the regulatory framework in order to encourage more. So it's a kind of carrots framework, and I was arguing that we already have a sticks framework exactly. that we decided to drop.
Yes, so I mean, this is, and you rightly said it down to politics very often of something which is a green supporting factor is much easier to sell than a brown penalizing factor. And there, I think we are just constrained with the reality of politics, of what lawmakers want to pursue, and what is possible to find as agreements. So I think quite blunt here that your analysis is correct there. Yeah, I think that's all from my side.
Thank you. And now I'll leave the floor to Daniela to also do the rebuttal.
Thank you. I think, Anna, it is my experience that when I talk to people from the Commission, we eventually converge in the same kind of direction, which is both great and a bit concerning maybe for me. But let me just say two things. First, on the carbon taxes, I think the carbon taxes, I see them a bit like the securitization. They are another political instrument to kind of, or a magic wand that is waved sometimes to say, look, the ideal would be that we would have markets functioning, externalities would be internalized. We would somehow, one way or another, force private or capitalism in general, private markets will force them to basically price carbon properly, which they are not doing at the moment. And this has come in many different ways, in many different shapes, including when you think about the European Central Bank's position on why it needed to decarbonize monetary policy. We had this idea that there is a carbon bias, that because the market is not functioning well into price financial assets, and the European Central Bank would do something about it, because if it didn't, it was basically reproducing and kind of hardwiring this carbon bias. But we know from the research from the IMF to many other places that to me, carbon taxes are not a viable political instrument, because if we really were to have the kind of carbon taxes that would work in order to correct externalities, what we are looking at is carbon shock therapy. We would have a disorderly transition that politically can't go on for more than 3 months. I mean, it's, the ECB's decarbonization framework and brown penalizing factor, because it was in some ways that, it lasted 9 months. I think this would be much shorter. So to me, making an appeal to carbon taxes is a way of basically parking the entire question of what else can we do besides carbon taxes. I don't think they are the kind of both political and I suppose also a policy instrument that we can rely on. I can't think of a way in which you can have an orderly transition with a meaningful carbon price. I can't think of a way. Think about what is happening in Germany now when you increase basically prices on fossil fuels. You have this deindustrialization, and then it doesn't stop there. It kind of spills over into other areas of economic and social life, and all of a sudden you have empowered the kind of people you don't want to have empowered, who don't like carbon taxes. So that's my first concern. The second one on, I think, when I call for public funding of the green transition, I don't just mean, although I did that in the first set of comments, I don't just mean that we need to just bribe private capital to invest in the sectors where we would want it to invest, which is what what the United States is doing very successfully, because the politics there works very differently to generate large or significant carrots. What I have in mind is that I think that for our climate commitments to be met at the scale that they need to be met, at the pace that they need to be met, we need to have the public sector working much better, reconstructing public capacity. And I'm saying this as somebody who's Romanian. I'm from Romania. I know how difficult it was for us to actually find ways to spend the next generation EU and the resilience funds. We got McKinsey to write plans for us in what sectors to invest. And that to me is a consequence of, the 30 years in which the European Union wanted markets to work and markets to drive things, and the state to sit back and not have enough capacity to plan and design. Because this is where we are, to me, at the moment. to have an orderly transition that is not politically destabilizing, you need to have a much bigger state, and that state needs to do a lot more organizing, coordination, and planning of economic activity than we accept at the moment. And that includes not just, you know, I don't know, deciding which sectors to shrink, which sectors to expand, but it also means green public infrastructure. I am not very convinced that, you know, pouring billions of dollars into the semiconductors and into EV, into Tesla, as Germany has done, that's not a solution for me. You know, replacing electric cars, diesel cars with private electric cars, it's not really going to get us where we would like to be if we took transition or the climate crisis seriously. I'm not sure that the European Union takes the climate crisis seriously anymore. Looking at the ways in which, you know, the geopolitics is shifting towards more arms rather than more green things. So that's my position. Is not that fiscal resources are needed, but we have to ask ourselves, that's the first step. We have to ask ourselves, how do we spend them? And how do we spend them is as difficult a question as how do we design a securitization framework that, you know, manages to deals away with greenwashing, but also preserves the incentives. And I'm going to finish with this. 10 years to revisit the originator versus issuer is a very long time. But yeah, I'll stop here.
Thank you very much to both. It was really insightful. So before we turn to our Q&A session, I wanted to comment for a second on the poll results. And so if we could have again the results for poll 2, please. Yeah, so as you can see, over one third of our participants believe that the framework is too complex and stringent. And yeah, around 20% voted both that they think that the green bond standards set the right incentives for sustainable securitization. And at the same time, another over 20% also commented that they think that the measures lack coordination. Yeah, which I think is an interesting result, also building on what you both have just mentioned regarding the current barriers and shortcomings of the current framework or the potential changes to be made. Could we also have the results for poll 3? Thank you. So 40% of our participants commented that given the fiscal constraints, the EU securitization market can actually scale up private investments in the green transition. But at the same time, over 40% voted that the promotion of securitization is a smokescreen for political constraints on budgeting and spending. So yeah, I just wanted to ask you if you would like to quickly comment on these results, both of you. Perhaps starting with Daniela, so going in reverse order this time, as you wish. Otherwise, we just directly move to the Q&A session.
I mean, I think on poll 2, it looks like the political groups in the European Parliament, they all have different views about what does securitization for and how should we use it. And I'm sure that in the next commission, and given what the next parliament will look like, we will get a much softer regulatory regime. I don't know if Anne agrees with me, but my sense is that that's where the politics is going. I don't know if that's where the commission will follow, but that's where the politics is going. And on poll 3, if you're closely observing the European Union, the political constraints are always, I mean, it's not just the European Union. And I just want, and I'll finish with this. I think one of the interesting things to me about what is going to happen over the next European Parliament and the way in which it will set the priorities for the Commission is that we are changing the European Parliament at the same time that the US is changing presidents. And the last time the US had a president that was not interested in climate, the European Union did a lot of interesting things for climate, including the sustainable finance taxonomy, which started far more ambitious than it ended, including the commitments to a dirty taxonomy, including the European Central Bank's commitments to penalize dirty credit flows. And I am hoping that, you know, if the worst comes to worst in the country I am in at the moment, this will maybe open up some political momentum, given, well, I don't know, it's a difficult question given the predictions for who is going to dominate the European Parliament. But I have some hope that maybe, again, we can revive, because I think this is the greatest loss for me over the last 3 years, particularly since the pandemic, is the political willingness to penalize dirty capital. We've had that, to penalize dirty credit flows, we've had that, and we've lost the political momentum, both due to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but also because I think the Biden administration was very successful at moving the goalposts elsewhere and panicking every European politician in the process.
Yeah, maybe. Shall I come in? Oh,
yes, please, if you wish.
all right. Yeah, first on Daniela's remark, if we have such a change in the parliament, I'm not so sure. I mean, even if it's moving more to the right, I don't think that the securitization framework will get very loose again. I think the experiences of the great financial crisis, where securitization or underwriting crisis, we should rather say, in the US, I don't think we see a repeat of that. And that it's that the system, that it needs to be safe, and that the key requirements and achievements we have done with the securitization regulation, I don't think that this will be dismantled even with a change in parliament. This I don't see. On the question you said, yeah, can you put the polls up? It just disappeared again. Sorry. So on the question whether it was too. Sorry, where is it now?
The other one?
Yeah, if the framework is too complex and stringent, yeah, as I said, I don't think we will move too much in that direction. We will see some changes probably in the more like the administrative burden side of things. Let's say not that we would change risk retention or something like that, but that some elements where we may have gone very far in requiring disclosure, in very nitty-gritty disclosure and very deep due diligence. I think there may rather be changes in this direction, but not on the overall thing. So I don't think that risk. And on poll 2, yeah, is it a smokescreen for public limited fiscal space? I'm not sure. I mean, it is like I think the idea that the EU or member states would exactly know on what to finance and what are the winning technologies and what should be financed. I think it's more like we have some idea, but we rather, or not we as Commission, but I think the public hand has some ideas. And this is like, of this thing, we need a private and public financing going together. But having this really putting it all to the public side and thinking they can plan ahead what is necessary in 20, 30, 40, and 50 in terms of technologies, I don't think that this is like you need rather the expertise of the private economy and not the sort of Planwirtschaft of the state can fix it on where the money should go. So I think that's why we speak of it needs to go together in a mixed public and private financing fashion. Yeah, I think we can go probably to the Q&As if we want to have some time for that still.
Thank you. Thank you very much to both. I would encourage again participants to submit their questions in the Q&A box. And I'm pleased to say that we already received some, but we would be very, very keen to have more. But just perhaps to start off, a question that came up already that was sent to us in advance was related to greenwashing. I think to some extent you both touched upon this. So I wanted to ask if you could please elaborate on whether you think that more should be done in order to fight greenwashing and how, especially on the securitization side. So I understand that you have already mentioned this point a bit, but I'm sure that participants would enjoy if you could expand. Thanks. And to both, of course, feel free to complement each other, contradict each other, and both to comment on all questions. Thanks.
Yeah, I think on the greenwashing, I thought we have a lot in the EU Green Bond Standard on transparency, on exclusion can be securitized, and yeah, I think I said already, I don't think that in the securitization you have this as the biggest greenwashing, the risks. I mean, in the wider financial sustainable finance framework, we have indeed tasked the ESAs or ESMA to look into greenwashing together with the NCAs, because it is a concern. And some of the initiatives on product labels or on transparency rules for products, this is certainly something we will look at for. But for securitization, I don't really see the need, or I don't think there's a big greenwashing risk.
Can I just clarify, Anne, because of course you know the wood much better than I do, and you see the trees a lot better. Can I just clarify that so my argument, my worry is not that there is a lot of greenwashing now, because it's small, but if you want to get scale, then you would, as you explained very well, you said that the reason why you decided to put the use of proceeds requirements on the originator was because there weren't enough green loans, right? So if I worked for a securitization, for a bank that wanted to push aggressively securitization, I would come to you and say, look, you want more? Let us, expand the range of loans that we can securitize, because then we generate use of proceeds that can be invested. So my worry is not so much that it's happening now because the market is small, but that there is a political argument that you need to kind of allow this trade-off between scale and the assets that are being securitized in order to generate significant financial flows in that are, or proceeds that from securitization. And I don't know whether it's possible within the framework that you have at the moment for banks to move emission risks to securitize emission risks and move them off their balance sheet, which is what I understand, and it refers to the first question for you. I understand that this is something that is gaining momentum in the US, and I don't know whether the European Commission would recognize this as part of green securitization.
I mean, I don't think we would move there anywhere very quickly, because all our policy making is really, in a way, bound to our to a solid analysis, for example, by EBA, and that we say, well, we have a way of looking at this in a due date for a certain report, and we said the market is taking up now, and we see how this develops, and since the EU GB framework is very recent, I don't see the risk that we directly go and reopen this and have that. So I don't think so.
Well, I'll come back to this in
yeah, no.
Yes.
No, we see how this framework picks up, but we don't have really we have to see how it works, and then we see.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So I have a couple of interesting questions that I think I can also group. One relating basically to other jurisdictions and other practices. So whether you are aware of similar discussions on securitizations happening in other geographies or markets. I know the US was mentioned previously, so perhaps you want to elaborate or discuss about other markets. And then another participant was saying that he was particularly interested in Daniela's point that a second Trump presidency could ironically open the space for EU leadership on climate finance. So he'd be curious to know from each of the speakers what right now are, in your opinion, the best practices in climate finance out there, for example, in other jurisdictions that the EU could emulate. Thank you.
Shall I have a go first? So do other markets or geographies are looking at green securitization? I'm not aware of it. I should be probably. In the US, certainly not. They keep quite away from this. But what I said earlier in the intervention is that even the EU GB is a sort of gold standard, but there are other market practices out there. It's for securitizations, but also if you had the ICMA green bond standard, and PRA, I think is one of the other ones. So you have market practices which then don't tag, for example, onto the taxonomy, but they may have some other measurements for what is considered green and how the disclosure works. So this certainly is also out there. And what we have seen is actually that the green securitization, not now our defined green bond standard, but that the US has actually more green securitizations than we. I don't know how exactly, or it wasn't possible from the sources we found how exactly it's defined, but that green securitizations, even if it's not a legal framework, a legal standard they adhere to, but more industry standard, this exists clearly also in other markets. But the question is then always does this stay as a market practice, or do the regulators take it up, or the legislators to make it something legal? Yeah, so that's maybe for the first point. Do you want to, Daniela, do you want to come in on that?
Yes, I think I would fully agree. I did have a bit of a check, and in your initial remarks, you made a very important point, which is that probably the jurisdiction where there is political momentum to push securitization over and over again for a variety of reasons is the European Union. That I think for the kind of macro financial constraints around public spending. And because securitization is somehow, and maybe Anne has an understanding of why, and I'm going to say this to the audience, we had a chat before, and we asked ourselves, why is it seen by politicians as a quick win? And maybe, I don't know if Anne, you want to have a reflection on why this may be the case. I've seen that in 2014, 2015, when Lord Hill was in charge of, I think it was still DJ FISMA then, I can't remember whether it was exactly DJ FISMA or some variation of this, and the STS process, the simple, transparent, standardized securitization process was introduced. It was under the same political narrative. You know, we still need capital markets, we need a capital markets union. To get a capital markets union, we need securitization because Europe has a bank-based financial system. We wanted to have tighter capital requirements for reasons that have to do with the global financial crisis, and therefore we need to create some balance sheet space. And there are many ways in which you can kind of question this narrative, but it is a very powerful political narrative, and that's why in other jurisdictions you have market practice. But I think the US doesn't want. So I would say the Federal Reserve doesn't want to open up this kind of worms, because then you have to open up other kinds of worms that have to do with how do you regulate or not, or how do you think about climate finance? And here in the US, even disclosures are very, very contested politically. I personally don't think disclosures are a big deal. I think they just add administrative burden to private finance, but they are not behave or transformative in the way that private finance does, and credit or issues credit to dirty or green activities. I'm skeptical of that. But here it is so contested that I don't think regulators would pick up any kind of measures to promote aggressively a green securitization. My understanding of why the green securitization market is larger in the US has to do with the role of government-sponsored mortgages, and you can securitize easily. And if you have the state behind, cash flows are going to come, and then it's nice. So that's. That's my sense, is only the European Union, and only because we have a very specific kind of political problem around how do we organize ourselves fiscally at national and supranational level.
Yeah. No, and that is, of course, an important point on the US agencies, and this is where we really want to move away from the idea that the EU should have a similar size securitization market than the US. The system is so far different, and it's not comparable. I mean, the US does not have covered bonds. What for us, a lot of the mortgage loans are securitized by, not securitized, they're going into covered bonds and not into securitization. So there's a big difference in many aspects to the US. So, and that's where they have why they have a stronger green securitization market in that way. Now, maybe to the second point, which was there on Daniela's point on Trump, a second Trump presidency could open up the space for more on climate finance, EU leadership. You rightly says it was last time like this, but frankly, with changes in Parliament and in likely changes, let's say, and we see it in national politics as well. I mean, I'm German, with the stronger growth of the AfD, and in other countries you have it as well. I don't think that this would really open up a lot, because the last time it was a possible to differentiate ourselves, I think, and the dynamics was differently. And we did not have the war in Ukraine, and we didn't have increased prices, energy prices going up very much with the energy crisis. I mean, in September 2022, where there was a lot of concern around the energy markets. So this is, I think, that the world has really moved on and has seen a lot of changes in the last 5 years, and also, of course, now with sustainable finance, for example, what has happened, also all the Green Deal requirements which are out there, you see that it has become much more real. When 5 years ago we discussed on how the Europe could be made greener, it was more, let's say, there was more ambition in it, and now people see that it targets them directly itself, that they have to cut down on certain things. So if you think of the agriculture side on the Farm to Fork initiative or things like that, which was the political, these are agreed texts, legal texts by Parliament and Council now, and even with a lot of lobbying and a lot of protests, things are being rolled back, because when you have ambitious aims and you think this is ideally where people should go, but as soon as you have it goes back to vested interests in different parts of society, it's much more difficult to do. So I don't see the point of the hope that we would have a new EU leadership on green if Trump comes in. I don't know, maybe I'm too pessimistic.
No, yeah, no, I can, maybe I can beat that. I'm also quite pessimistic, but I think what I want, I mean, I just want us to remember that there was once ambition, and that ambition also had very significant political and institutional consequences. And I think one of the reasons we are having this debate is because the Commission went pretty far in the direction that politics pushed it, both, I think, on the sustainable finance taxonomy, and I know that, you know, not everybody inside the Commission is happy with the way in which the sustainable, the taxonomy has been expanded to include things that we thought should not be there. But the European Central Bank still has a framework for closely monitoring the carbon footprint of every large corporation that issues bonds in the European Union, or bonds that are used as collateral. So that hasn't died; it just has been parked. And maybe the question of politics to me is maybe a bit more complicated, but I'm an economist, so I'll just say this. Maybe it's not just the parliament that has to do things, but you know, people in the street. And I don't know whether the political momentum for more climate action has passed or has moved, as you said, into the farmers' camp. The farmers seem to be much better at intimidating politicians than, you know, the young green movements. That is, of course, a worry to some extent, because although you have to recognize some concerns that farmers have, some of those farms are also very large, and they are very damaging for climate, and they are protecting very singular interests. So it's a complicated story, but somehow there is a narrative in the, and I'm not sure I disagree with it, but there is a narrative in the European politicians' mind that, you know, you can't give up food security, and somehow now we've arrived at this idea that food security is about preserving damaging farming practices to some extent, right? I mean, you're in Brussels. I've seen farmers burning everything around there. If young Germans had been burning those things, they'd be in prison now, or probably they are in prison. So yeah, it's a complicated moment we're in, but you know what to do. You have to hope that things turn around one way or another. And I was told by a political analyst in Brussels that, you know, the years that finish with 4 are years for the right, and the years that finish in 9 are years for the left. So until 2029, Anne will prepare better.
Thank you very much to both. So I could listen to you for hours, and I'm sure that even our participants could, but in the interests of time, I would now launch the final poll, which basically would ask you to comment again on the motion of today's session, and one of the answers is slightly revisited. So is the EU securitization, also building on the points by the speakers, is the EU securitization market supporting the transition to a sustainable economy? Yes, the EU is using securitization both to fund green activities as well as to free up the balance sheet of banks for more green lending. Yes, even though it has not unlocked its full potential yet. No, and it will not be able to do it until the full completion of the Capital Markets Union. No, the trade-offs are impossible to resolve. So while you vote, I would ask the speakers to say, if they wish, some final remarks, like a couple of sentences each, and then we can wrap up today's session. Thank you very much. First, Anna, you can go first.
Yeah, I can. Okay. I don't know. It's difficult to come back to the very dry things of EU securitization after the debate we just had. So well, I hope the audience found it interesting and still believes that the green securitization and the sustainable finance framework can continue as it is. I mean, this is what we want to do, and the framework, the ambitious framework, is out there. And we hope we do not roll back on this also with a new parliament. I think this is like my closing word here from my side.
I am still on my side. It's a third best measure. It's a political papering over other things that we could do much more successfully, but the politics is not there. So I think, you know, the concern and the future is to make sure that the details are not shifted in a way that, although Anne has reassured us that they will not be, but to make sure that whatever the framework for green securitization looks like in 2 or 3 years' time, it doesn't look a lot more like greenwashing or a lot more like we have to accept larger trade-offs. And we haven't said, I mean, I don't think there is systemic risk in there, but maybe at some point there will be.
Thank you to both. So we can see from the poll that the audience, that there is no striking answer, that our participants have voted for all 4 answers, which I believe is a very interesting conclusion and brings back to the complexities of this topic. If you wish to continue engaging on the topic, there are also a few references available on our website, and I would also encourage you to follow the FBF on our social media in order to have more information about our events and trainings. Also, building and on topics connected to what we have discussed today, we would like to remind you that there are 2 events that we would like to invite you to. One is the annual conference 2024, From Birth to Maturity, 10 Years of the Banking Union, co-organized with the Institute for European Policymaking at Università Bocconi. And then we will also have the Sustainable Finance Academy, which will delve into the meaning of sustainable finance, the various regulatory initiatives, and the repercussions in the practical context. And yeah, registrations are open for both, and we look forward to welcoming you there. With this, I would also like to extend my extensive thanks to our speakers today. I believe it was a really enriching and extensive discussion, and I'm sure our participants enjoyed it. Thank you all for attending today's FBF Discuss, and thank you to our speakers for our excellent discussion.
And thank you, Federica and colleagues. There are several colleagues of Federica in the background you haven't seen that done a lot of important work to make sure that we can all be here together. Thank you. I very much enjoyed it. Nice hanging out, Anne. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.